It's Saturday, March 24th, 2018. And I am going to do a My 10's list, which is the Saturday show, My 10's. This is my top 10 list. It's just my opinion. If you have a top 10 list, if yours is different than mine, it probably is. Put it in the comments below. But this is my top 10 favorite race drivers of all time. Now, this can be any racing discipline, and I pretty much pulled from only four of them, which was Formula One, NHRA, NASCAR, and IndyCar. What I found out is I have a lot more favorites in drag racing than I thought, and it's not my favorite type of racing. But I had a few more favorites than I thought. Um, Actually, no, I even pulled from SCCA Trans Am, Sports Car Club of America Trans Am series, because the number 10 pick on here is Willie T. Ribbs. And I'm sure a lot of you are going, who the heck is Willie T. Ribbs? Willie T. Ribbs was actually, way back in the day, one of the early African American race car drivers. Now, he wasn't the first by any stretch of the imagination, but he was an early one. Of course, we know that motorsports doesn't really have a lot of African American drivers, and especially back in the 80s, there just wasn't a lot of them. But I used to watch just about any racing that would come on in the 80s, and there used to be SCCA Trans Am stuff on. And Willie T. Ribbs was always the guy I rooted for. I always rooted for Willie T. He never had a great career. He did a little bit of NASCAR. I think he was the first African American driver to compete in the Indy 500. So that's a pretty big deal. But his career wasn't, gigantic. He won 9 races in the SCCA series, and won Rookie of the Year in 1983. Then he bounced around to a lot of other places where he never really found a lot of success, but he was just always a driver I always rooted for. I always wanted to see him do good. Anytime I saw his name pop up somewhere, I wanted to see him do good. And I mean, he had some success, but he never quite managed the success that I would hope that he would get. Number nine. Number nine for me is a guy who's been in Formula One. He's been in IndyCar. He's been in NASCAR. So he's been in 3 of the. He just didn't race in the SCCA Trans Am series, or he didn't drag race. But it's Juan Pablo Montoya. And you're thinking, oh, what? Juan Pablo Montoya? Juan Pablo Montoya, to me, every time I saw his interviews, he made me laugh. He was funny. He was a very charismatic driver. And I loved seeing a Colombian driver in NASCAR. Because there's not a lot of international flair in that sport. But Juan Pablo Montoya was always very, very. I still remember one of the things he said about the difference between Formula One and NASCAR. He says I think they had an award for who passes the most cars in Formula One, and during the season. And he says you would pass more cars than that in one NASCAR race than you would pass in an entire season in Formula One. So I always thought that was pretty funny. But Juan Pablo Montoya, he actually won the 1999 Kart FedEx Championship, which was the IndyCar. He was the Rookie of the Year in I think that 2000. No, he was the Rookie of the Year in NASCAR. I wrote some of his stuff down. He won the Indy 500 2 times, which was really good. He had 5 IndyCar wins, 7 wins in Formula One. Never won a title, but he did win 7 times in Formula One. This is one of the toughest disciplines to win races because there's not a lot of them, and usually there's always one dominant team, and it's tough to get wins there. And he didn't win any championships, so it means he was never on a dominant team. He did have 2 NASCAR wins. Both of them, I think, were on road courses, which he was known for being a road course master. Racing IndyCar and racing Formula One, because Formula One don't race ovals. But Juan Pablo was awesome. And number 8, Ari Luyendyk. Not a lot of people are going to remember Ari Luyendyk. In fact, I think they remember his son now more than anything, Ari Luyendyk Jr. for some reason. When I looked up Ari Luyendyk, it brought up his son first. I'm going, I don't care about his kid. It's like he didn't have the racing career his dad did. Then I look back at what racing career his dad had. It wasn't much of a career. But I remember he did win 2 Daytona 500s, which was really cool. Or not, sorry, Indy 500s. He won 2 Indy 500s. That's like all these in 1990 and 1997. See, I wrote a lot of this stuff down so that I wouldn't forget because I'm old and the brain is sailing away. But he also was, I lost the place here. He was also from the Netherlands. He was called the Flying Dutchman. And he had 7 race wins in IndyCar racing. Never won a championship. Oh, but he drove the Domino's car. Back in the day, of course, there wasn't, there was like 4 or 5, pizza places, and Domino's was one of the best. And I just remember he drove the Domino's car. I was young at the time, and I thought, oh, Domino's! But Arie Luyendyk was a guy I always rooted for. I always wanted him to win championships, and he did win 2 Daytona 500s, which was really awesome. Number 7, another one a lot of people aren't going to remember, Larry Pearson. Larry Pearson was never a star on the biggest stage. In fact, he starred in the Busch Grand National Series, which is now the Xfinity Series. He was a huge star there. He did go up into the next level of series a few times, but he never had the success. He was David Pearson's son, but Larry Pearson used to drive the number 21 Chattanooga Chew car. It was, it was a chewing tobacco company, and he was really good. I mean, he was really good. Drove the older looking Monte Carlos. I just remember they were so awesome. But his career, he had 15 wins in 15 years, 12 poles, 78 top 5s, and he won 2 championships in the Busch Grand National Series, which is now the Xfinity Series. And Larry Pearson was always the guy I rooted for. That was back in the day when I thought that they were 2 separate series and you never really did anything other than here was your Busch Grand National Series, here was the Winston Cup Series, and this is just where you stayed. I don't think it was looked at back then as a developmental league like they kind of look at the Xfinity Series now. It's kind of the way you develop the young drivers, and it has been looked at that way for a long, long time. But I don't remember it being considered that back in the day. I just remember it seemed like a lot of older drivers who weren't very good were down there that couldn't compete with the Harry Gants and the Dale Earnhardts and the Cale Yarboroughs and the Bill Elliott's and the Jeff Bodines and the Terry Labonis, and it was guys that were almost good enough but not quite to make it up into the big leagues. But Larry Pearson was my favorite. At number 6, this one might be a little controversial. Little E, Dale Earnhardt Jr. Dale Earnhardt Jr. to me was slightly a disappointment, only in that he never won a championship. He won 2 championships in the Busch Series, 1998, 1999. He has a ton of victories, but I feel like he never lived up to what he could. I never expected him to win 7 championships like his dad, but I thought he could at least win 1. I thought he was just that talented, but sometimes it felt like he never had all the drive that he needed. Sometimes it felt like he was, almost going through the motions. But he had a great career. If you take away the Earnhardt name and you gave him, the last name Smith, you would look at this career and go, this is a pretty good career. 2-time Busch champion, 2-time Daytona 500 winner, 26 victories, 15 poles, and in the Busch Series, which is the Xfinity Busch/Xfinity Series, he had 24 wins. So you would look, that's a pretty good career. He did really well, and he was the most popular driver forever. So if you take off the Earnhardt name, his career's pretty good. He had a pretty good career. You just look at him the same way you look at like a Carl Edwards or a Mark Martin. Really good drivers just never quite pushed their way past. But Junior, to me, never quite lived up to the potential. I think he, just like Edwards and Martin, he never quite got to that next level, which he should have, because he was super talented and he should have at least won 1. At number 5, Big Daddy Don Garlits. Another old timer, Big Daddy Don Garlits. I have to go to my phone for this. This guy did a ton of stuff. I knew him most for his Top Fuel. He won 10 championships in the AHRA. He won 4 titles in the IHRA, and he won 3 more championships in the NHRA. So he won 17 total world championships. At age 54, he won his last championship. He won 144 national events. That means 144 times this guy won. So, he had a long career, but he used to have these awesome vehicles, a Swamp Rat. He was one of the first guys that he put like a domed enclosure over it. And at one point, he had these tiny little skinny tires that had like this little strip of rubber on them, and the rubber used to splinter off of it all the time. And he had like a little casing that went over the wheels, the front wheels, to try to make it more aerodynamic. He is very innovative. I even went to his museum way back in the day. I went to the Big Daddy Don Garlitz racing museum. This was when I was like 16 years old, and my parents were planning a trip to Florida. So we were going to drive down to Florida, and along the way, we were going to all do something we wanted to do. Well, my dad wanted to go to Graceland. He wanted to see Elvis's house. My mom wanted to see a battleship, which was weird, a battleship and a submarine. I never really knew why. My sister wanted to see a beach, going to Florida. It's pretty good. A pretty good chance you'll get to see a beach. And I wanted to see the Big Daddy Don Garlitz Racing Museum. So my parents took me to the Big Daddy Don Garlitz Racing Museum. I got to see a lot of really cool cars. And in there was a starting line simulator, which basically they had the tree, the starting line tree, and it would give you your reaction time. My sister kicked my butt every single time. It's like, even as a kid, I was fat and slow. So it's just like my sister was kicking my butt. It's like I would have hoped to have had the faster car, because she would have left me on the line every single time. There were some times it's like I was falling asleep on the line. I mean, she'd had like a gigantic advantage. Then, of course, she got in my head and I started red lighting. It's terrible. So I was never a pro drag racer, because she would have red lighted tons of time thinking, my sister's over there and she's going to get me off the line. I got to get out. But I didn't drag race, so it's okay. On the street maybe every once in a while, but that's a different story for a different time. But to finish that story, my dad got to see Graceland, my mom got to see a battleship, and my sister got gypped because we were going to Florida. There are lots of beautiful beaches in Florida. You know where we saw the beach? Mississippi. We went to a Mississippi beach that looked at the Gulf of Mexico. Not at the ocean, the Gulf of Mexico. No offense to Mississippi or the Mississippi beaches, but it's like when you're from Colorado, you don't see beaches. I mean, so, it's kind of, you have a chance to see, the beautiful Florida beaches that you see on postcards and pictures and all that stuff. And we just went to a place that had sand and water connected to it. It didn't matter where it was looking. So, but Big Daddy Don Garlitz was an innovator. In fact, I think at the age of like 84 or something like that, he raced 84 or 70. I can't remember the exact age. He took an electric dragster and went 184 miles an hour. It's like, wow, the guy is still doing things like that. It's just not out of his blood. So at number 4, Michael Schumacher, greatest Formula One racer of all time. He won 2 championships with Benetton, 5 with Ferrari. I think he won 5 in a row. Amazing feat that only Jimmy Johnson can really say in motorsports. But Michael Schumacher, look at his career stats. 7-time champ, 91 victories, 155 podiums. Unbelievably good. Now, the problem with Formula One, and you see it even to this day, you get one dominant team pretty much every year. There's not a lot of competition. So for those years when he was at Ferrari, he was on the best team in the best equipment. But you still got to get it to the finish line, because remember, you always got a teammate. And I think his teammate might have been Fernando Alonso. I can't remember. But Michael Schumacher, he won 5 of these things for Ferrari, and he won 2 in Benetton, which Benetton wasn't one of the greatest all-time teams, but he did win 2 championships for them. So that was pretty cool. Now, unfortunately, in December of 2013, he had a skiing accident, which put him in a coma, and he had massive head injuries. He did get to go home at some point, but no, they keep him very private. They don't tell anybody what's going on with him. All we know is that he's still alive and still receiving treatment for his injuries. But we don't really know what's, you don't want to think that one of the greatest race drivers of all time ended up in a bad way, but he's still alive by what I hear, and hopefully he'll get better. But when you've been in a coma, I think he was in a coma for 6 to 8 months, a long time. Usually that does not do good things to the body. I mean, usually it's not like the movies where you just pop up out of the coma, you take a couple of creaky steps, and I'm fine. Now I can go find my attempted killer and the guy who killed my family. That's not the way it works. You're in a coma that long, and you come out of it, and there's probably a lot of medical problems, and the body has got to go through a big process. I don't know if you recover from that, but I hope that Michael Schumacher does. I would love to see him up and moving around and do an interview sometime in the near future saying, I'm better now. So I hope you're getting better, Schumacher. I hope you are, buddy. I one of the greatest race car drivers of all time, and my number 4 favorite of all time. Number 3, Kenny Bernstein. Kenny Bernstein was one of the... Back in the day, I watched a ton of NHRA and NASCAR. They were my 2 favorites. And Don Garlits was my favorite in Top Fuel. Kenny Bernstein was my favorite in Funny Car. Kenny Bernstein ended up moving over to Top Fuel later on. But I remember the Bud King. Bernstein was my favorite. Him and Dale Armstrong did some sick things with those cars and really innovated the Funny Car series to that point. NHRA made a lot of rule changes, basically taking away their ability to innovate as much as they would like to. And they moved to the Top Fuel series. Kenny Bernstein's career, he was a 6-time champ. He won 2 championships in Top Fuel and 4 straight in Funny Car. Amazing. Just an amazing driver. One of his Top Fuel championships, I think of the one in 96, he says was tainted because Blaine Johnson passed away. He ended up giving the trophy to Blaine Johnson's brother and Alan Johnson. So he gave it to basically the guy he thought probably should have won the title if they wouldn't have lost him. But Kenny Bernstein was a great driver. He's a great race car. He owned an IndyCar team and he owned a NASCAR team for a while. Brett Bodine drove the Quaker State Buick for a while, and I think Ricky Rudd drove it for a little while too. They never won any titles, but they were competitive. I mean, they were definitely a competitive team. Kenny Bernstein retired in like 2002, handed over the reins to his son Brandon. Brandon had some wins. I don't think he ever won any titles. Once again, it's kind of the Kenny Bernstein. It's kind of the Dale Earnhardt Jr., Dale Earnhardt thing. Brandon Bernstein was a pretty good driver in his own right, but never the driver his dad was. Kenny was an amazing driver. And to go from winning Funny Car titles, being dominant in Funny Car, and still winning championships in the next Nitro. He was the first driver to win multiple titles in the Nitro series. So just an incredible. Kenny was the guy I always rooted for. I always wanted Kenny to win every race. He had the nickname the Bud King. I mean, he was awesome. It's like Kenny Bernstein was one of the greats. So now we're gonna move on to my number 2 driver. There you go. And Kenny Bernstein, great career, but number 2, and we're still sticking around in NHRA, Warren Johnson. Warren Johnson, way back in the day, had a rivalry with Bob Glidden. I did not like Bob Glidden one little bit, and I wanted Warren Johnson to kick his butt every single time. Warren Johnson was awesome. He still races, I think, to this day, and he's like in his 70s. Warren Johnson was even old in the 80s when I was watching him, and he's still doing it now. But Warren Johnson was, his stats, 97 wins, and he was a 6-time champ in stock car racing, in pro stock. I don't know why. I guess it's because I hated Bob Glidden so much, and Warren Johnson was every bit the driver Bob Glidden was, if not better. Had a longer career than, but Warren Johnson, I always used to root for it. It's like Warren J. I kept rooting for Warren J. I didn't care that his son Kurt Johnson raced. He was okay. He wasn't as good as Warren. But it's just another one of those things. Dad's a superstar, kid's okay. But Warren J. I would love to see Warren J win another title, another national event title now, but he's not a full-time racer, of course. But Warren J is awesome. Warren Johnson, it's like, keep going, buddy. I hope you race as long as you want to. Keep going, because you can tell he still loves it. Now my number 1 driver, Number one driver. This one's pretty easy for me. I mean, the number one driver's always been in my head since 1984. My favorite race driver of all time, Dale Earnhardt Sr. I don't care what anybody says. I know there are other people out there with better stats. I know there are other people with maybe a few more accomplishments and maybe a different discipline of racing. You're considered a better driver than others. But Dale Earnhardt to me is the best driver to ever race. Now, if Jimmy Johnson can ever get an eighth championship, I might put him as the best driver, but he's never going to be my favorite. Dale Earnhardt will always be my favorite. Dale Earnhardt, 7-time champion. The Wrangler Jean Chevrolet is still my favorite paint scheme on those 80s Monte Carlos. I loved that paint scheme because in the 80s when I started watching ESPN and I could watch NASCAR every week, Dale Earnhardt was the guy that was kind of moving people out of his way. It's like, you're too slow, move! And he had the name the Intimidator, Ironhead. He was, he was awesome. I mean, it's somebody said he was called the Count of Monte Carlo. It's like, well, they didn't race in Monte Carlo. Why would you call him the Count of Monte Carlo? I never really looked at that one, but it's like they used to say that when his car was at its worst, he was at its best. He was at his best. When the car wasn't handling and it wasn't doing really, really good, that's when Earnhardt was even better. I still remember the one race where he rolled the car down the front stretch or back stretch or something like that. He goes to get into the ambulance and he looks back and he says, all four wheels are still on the car. So he went and he asked the guy, it's like, can that car still start? And it started right up and he goes, get out, give me my car back. It's like he just went tumbling down the front stretch or whatever. He's just rolled it. He's getting into an ambulance. He sees that all four wheels are still on and he wants to get back in and go. Nobody can say that it's like, some people it might be a little traumatizing to roll down roll and do flips. And it's like for him, it was just like, oh, the car will still go? I'm getting back in. And, they had to try to fit, still had to try to fit the spoiler in the trunk and put all the pieces back onto the car so it would run. But he still ran some more laps to get points. I remember when he won his Daytona 500. When he won his Daytona 500, that was one of the best. It was, let me see, I'm trying to remember. He won the 98 Daytona 500. He'd been trying for years. And he lost to Dale Jarrett. He just couldn't get around him. There was the year he lost to Derek Cope where he broke something. I think he broke something, and so he ended up fading behind Derek Cope. Then there was another year where he was having a really good race, and he hit a bird on the backstretch. That's right, he hit a bird with his Lumina. And it's like, the aerodynamics were never the same because it basically messed up the front of the car, so the aerodynamics were never the same. He just was jinxed in Daytona. In 98, when he finally won that thing, he won it. And I just remember the line of crew members that all wanted to congratulate Dale Earnhardt that just lined up. For my favorite driver of all time, that's one of those you kind of tear up. It's like he won it, and that's the respect that everybody had for him. Even when Darrell Waltrip won his first Daytona 500, and it took him a long time, and he was a 3-time champ, they didn't line up for him like that. But for Dale Earnhardt, they lined up. And I don't know if you'll ever find another driver that had that kind of respect in NASCAR. Hardest driving, hardest charging, didn't matter what the car was doing. Tough competitor. You were going to get Dale Earnhardt's best every single race. They used to say that it's like sometimes when he was chasing down people, they always said it looked like his car was smiling, which was, it wasn't true, but it was just funny to say it. Sadly, of course, we lost Dale, and I want to get the year right on this. We lost him February 18th of 2001. That was sad. Because I remember watching that race, and I watched that wreck, and it didn't look like anything serious. And there's a ton of us, we all say the same thing. We've seen people, like I said, I've seen them roll down the front stretch, get out of the car, get into an ambulance, get out of the ambulance, get back in the car. So I didn't think anything of this at the time. And later you get the announcement that we'd lost him. That was tough. I didn't know what to think because this was my favorite driver. I never had another driver that was my favorite like this. Even the other drivers I've listed, they were my favorites in some of their disciplines. But Dale Earnhardt was always, that's why I said when I did this list, number one was easy. Putting the other 9 together was a little bit tougher, but number one was never in question. None of these drivers will ever take over number one. I mean, Larson right now for NASCAR, he seems like he might have a little bit of Dale Earnhardt in him, but I don't know if he's anything. He's a kind of an honorable mention. I just don't know what his career is going to turn into yet. But Dale Earnhardt, no doubt about it, always my favorite. There's never been a question of who my favorite driver is of all time. I always said it. If I had a dream table to have dinner with of 4 people, we did this once a long time ago. 4 people you could pick, dead or alive. What 4 people would you want to sit and have dinner with? I always chose, the 4 is kind of weird, but it'd be Jeremy Clarkson, Gordon Ramsay, Sam Kinison, and Dale Earnhardt. Those would be the 4 people I'd want to have dinner with. I don't know what we talk about really, but there's some good talkers in there, and I'm guessing that Dale might be the quietest of the bunch, but he's the one whose stories I'd want to hear the most. So I'd be kind of poking the bear, going, "Come on, Dale, say something, Dale. I want to hear some stories." So that's my top 10 list of my favorite race drivers of all time. Dale Earnhardt had 76 career wins, which doesn't sound like a lot compared to some of them, but he's still, to me, 7-time champ, just the best race driver that ever lived, and my favorite race car driver of all time. Rest in peace, Mr. Earnhardt. It's like, I don't think I really have much else to say after that. So, to the troops, past, present, and future, thanks for the freedom.